July 27, 1361, outside the walls of Visby, the wealthiest city in Scandinavia, 2,000 farmers stand in makeshift armor. Behind those walls, the merchants have locked their gates. Ahead, a Danish army prepares for slaughter. Within hours, 1,800 bodies will carpet the ground. The survivors will flee screaming, and a Danish king will demand barrels filled with treasure. This is how Denmark clawed back from total collapse, and how the Battle of Visby became the bloody turning point that reshaped Northern Europe. To understand Visby, we must go back 21 years, back to a Denmark that had ceased to exist. The year is 1340. Denmark is not a kingdom. It's German-controlled territories. Foreign garrisons occupy castles. There is no king. How did this happen? It began with King Erik VI, whose costly wars bankrupted the realm. When he died childless in 1319, his brother Christopher II took the crown, but Christopher was weak. To become king, he signed away royal authority. He couldn't tax nobles or punish them without trial. Desperate for money, Christopher mortgaged Denmark itself. Castle by castle, he pawned his kingdom to German creditors from the Hanseatic League. These weren't loans, these were sovereignty transfers. Foreign lords now ruled Danish lands. The overtaxed peasants revolted. In 1326, Christopher was overthrown. Though briefly restored, he died in 1332, leaving no successor. What followed were 8 years called the Kingless Times. 3 German counts carved up Denmark. Count John of Holstein-Plön took Zealand. Count Gerhard of Holstein controlled Jutland. Sweden absorbed Scania. Denmark had been erased. The counts ruled through force, extracting brutal taxes. By the late 1330s, resentment reached its breaking point. Then came April 1st, 1340. Danish nobleman Niels Ebbesen led fighters into Randers under darkness. They infiltrated Count Gerhard's quarters. By dawn, they'd reached his chambers and killed him in his bed. Chronicles say they decapitated him with a sword. German forces launched savage reprisals. Ebbesen was killed in battle later that year, but Gerhard's death created a power vacuum. Danish nobles seized their moment. They elected Valdemar Atterdag, son of Christopher II, as king. He was 20 years old. His realm was tiny, just lands north of the Limfjord. The nobles thought they could control him, as they'd controlled his father. They were catastrophically wrong. Valdemar IV possessed political genius combined with military talent. Over 7 years, he would prove himself one of the era's most capable rulers. He married strategically, gaining North Jutland as dowry. He imposed heavy taxes to fund reconquest. Then he targeted Zealand, the historic heart of Danish power. Zealand controlled the Øresund Strait, the narrow passage between the Baltic and North Seas. Whoever held Zealand controlled Baltic trade. In 1342, Valdemar expelled a Swedish Holstein coalition from Copenhagen. By 1346, he'd recaptured every major castle on Zealand. He even sold distant Estonian territories to the Teutonic Order for 19,000 silver marks, using those funds to buy back mortgaged Danish heartlands. A year later, he captured Nyborg Castle, bringing Funen under his control. In 7 years, Valdemar had resurrected Denmark from the dead. He centralized authority by promoting loyal officials over corrupt nobles. He reorganized administration and improved taxation. He encouraged economic revival by strengthening towns like Copenhagen. When the Black Death struck in 1350, Valdemar used the crisis to acquire more lands from bankrupt owners, expanding royal holdings. By the mid-1350s, Denmark was a kingdom reborn. But Valdemar's ambitions brought him into conflict with the most powerful economic force in Northern Europe, the Hanseatic League. The League was a confederation of German merchant cities holding a monopoly on Baltic trade. They controlled routes, established exclusive ports, and accumulated vast wealth. They built fleets to combat piracy and deter interference. The linchpin of their network was the Øresund Strait. half of which Valdemar now controlled. Minor clashes erupted in 1358 over trade rights. Valdemar knew full war was coming. To win, Denmark needed strategic positions to strangle League trade. In 1360, Valdemar struck. His fleet sailed for Helsingborg in Swedish-controlled Scania. The port fell quickly. Finding Sweden's King Magnus weakened by internal revolt, Valdemar overran the entire region. Denmark now controlled both sides of the Øresund. Valdemar immediately instituted the Øresund tolls. Every ship passing through had to stop at Helsingør and pay duty. Denmark's geography became an economic weapon. These tolls would fund Danish power for 4 centuries. But Valdemar wasn't finished. He rested his forces over winter and prepared for the next target, the strategic key to Baltic commerce, Gotland and its capital, Visby. Gotland was the crossroads of the Baltic. Visby was one of Europe's wealthiest ports, where merchants traded grain, timber, furs, and luxuries. Control Gotland, and you dominated Baltic commerce. In May 1361, a warning letter from Sweden's king reached Visby. Prepare your defences, Valdemar is coming. On July 22nd, warning fires blazed along Gotland's coast. Valdemar's fleet had been sighted. The Danish ships anchored at Frøjel. Local militia tried stopping the landing but were scattered by Valdemar's veterans. The army came ashore, organised supplies, then began the 20-mile march toward Visby. Valdemar's son Christopher marched beside him, along with Eric of Saxony, a skilled raider. As they approached the Ajmunds Bridge, scouts reported it destroyed. Militia waited to exploit their vulnerability. Valdemar detoured through the Fjalle Marsh. As his columns moved through enclosed ground, horns blasted. An ambush erupted. The Gotland militia attacked with desperate ferocity. Chaos threatened Danish ranks momentarily, but Valdemar's veterans rallied. They returned fire with arrows and crossbow bolts. The ambush collapsed. The militia retreated toward Visby. When they reached the city, they discovered something unthinkable. The gates were locked. The merchants of Visby declared strict neutrality. They would not fight the King of Denmark. The militia was forced to sleep in the open before their own city's walls. On the morning of July 27th, Valdemar's army appeared. The Gotlanders formed 2 companies, men from the island's north and south. They carried their folkvapen, spear, sword or axe, shield, helmet, and bow. But only a quarter had metal armor. A third of the force consisted of elderly men, youths, and disabled men. They'd built a rampart between the gates to slow Danish cavalry. At noon, Valdemar's forces took position. The battle began. The militia expected a cavalry charge. Instead, Valdemar split his army. One force engaged the main line. Another probed Visby's western gates, threatening to flank them. Then Valdemar unleashed his archers and crossbowmen. Volley after volley rained into the packed militia. The superior Danish equipment, particularly heavy crossbows, gave them overwhelming advantage. Bolts punched through armor and cloth alike. The rampart proved useless. Men fell by dozens, then hundreds. On Visby's walls, some officers sought permission to help. City officials ordered them to stand down. When the missile fire ceased, Danish infantry advanced in tight formations against the shattered militia. When they collided, the difference in training became brutally apparent. The Danes steamrolled the defenders. The Gotlanders fought bravely, inflicting perhaps 300 Danish casualties from Valdemar's 2,500 men. But of 2,000 Gotland militia, 1,800 fell in battle. Their bodies formed piles before the walls. Citizens of Visby stared down in horror. Too late, officials opened a gate for survivors. Those who fled were cut down by Danish cavalry. Legend says Valdemar produced enormous barrels and demanded they be filled with treasure. This was the price to avoid massacre. The inhabitants complied. Valdemar posted a garrison to maintain authority and ensure tribute collection. Then he set sail, leaving Baltic powers watching with dread. Valdemar's first 21 years were a masterclass in ruthless state-building. He promoted loyal officials to break aristocratic power. He centralized royal authority and strengthened hereditary succession. From a mortgaged kingdom, he reconstructed institutions, reclaimed territory, and revived the economy. His methods were brutal. Peasants suffered heavy taxation. His Gotland conquest was merciless. But Valdemar understood Denmark could not rise through caution. The Øresund tolls he established generated revenue until 1857. His reconquest of Zealand and Scania reunited Danish heartlands. Visby announced Denmark's return as a major power, but Visby was not an ending, it was a beginning. The Hanseatic League was mobilizing for retaliation. Sweden sought to reclaim territories. German princes eyed Denmark with hostility. The coming years would bring wars testing whether Valdemar's kingdom could survive the storm it unleashed. But on that summer day in 1361, one thing was clear. Denmark had returned from the dead. A kingdom carved up and ruled by foreign creditors had been dragged back through one extraordinary ruler's will. The bodies before Visby's walls were more than conquest casualties. They were a message sent across the Baltic. Denmark would no longer be ignored or controlled. Denmark had clawed back from ruin and would fight to dominate the north. Valdemar had transformed a broken realm into a power that would shape northern European politics for generations. His legacy was built on pragmatism, military prowess, and an unflinching willingness to do whatever survival required. The age of Danish weakness had ended. The age of Danish power had begun. And the blood spilled at Visby was the price paid for that transformation. If you enjoyed this story of medieval history's most dramatic comeback, hit that like button and subscribe for more documentaries on the battles and rulers that shaped our world. Ring the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Drop a comment. Were Valdemar's brutal methods justified, or did his ambitions go too far? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.